Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining us today here on Point of View. We're going to, on our weekend edition, cover a lot of different topics. In this first hour, primarily the listeners are in the state of Texas, but not exclusively. But certainly Texas now has not only become a state program issue, but also a national program issue, because almost all these articles I have here talk about what Governor Greg Abbott has done. So I'm going to put a little bit on the table here, and then we'll talk about it. The Texas Governor Greg Abbott Thursday has actually said that the state would pause its efforts to reopen the economy. I'll talk about some of the reasons why he feels that needs to take place. In his statement, he says, as we experience an increase in both positive COVID-19 cases and hospitalizations, we are focusing on strategies that slow the spread of this virus while also allowing Texans to continue earning a paycheck to support their families. Last thing we want to do is a state to go backwards and close down businesses. This temporary pause will help our state corral the spread until we can safely enter the next phase of opening our state for business. So he's backing off on a few things. I'll talk about what those mean in just a minute. But the reason, one of the many reasons, is Texas has added more than 5,000 new cases each day over the last couple of days. If you look at the infection rate, for a long time, it was at about 4%, and it got up to about 6%. Governor Abbott has said before that if it goes over 10%, you really have to pay attention, and it's over 11% right now. So, nevertheless, we have in studio with us, of course, Kelly Shackelford, Lathan Watts. We're going to be doing a lot of First Liberty cases later because those are important. But first of all, you both live in the state of Texas. Kelly, what about all this?
Well, I got an email, I think it was today, because the update was that today the governor said, he's all the bars are going to be closed and they're moving the restaurants to 50%. So I got this email from our COO, who Dave, and he was just informing me. And my first comment was to him, "Are you trying to tell me something about my employees that the bars are closing, that this is of some significance?" But
theoretically, they just closed 8 minutes ago, but yeah, we'll see.
And so I was like, anyway, it's obviously not a good thing. What's interesting to me is that I don't usually feel very sorry for politicians, so I probably don't even totally feel sorry here. But Abbott's like getting shot at from both sides right now. There are people that are very angry that he's moved in the direction with regard to the mask and everything else, and then there's people who's like, aha, he's caused all this because he opened things up too quickly, and so there's people on both sides attacking him in this, and so I think it's always been to me irrelevant, and I've thought it's bizarre that they keep talking about how many cases there are. Who cares how many cases there are? Number one, we all know they don't know how many cases there are. I mean, we just see a report from Penn State that they're missing by 10 million the number of cases. So the number of cases or it really should be, is number of cases that we think we know about, which would make it the irrelevant number that it really is. What you should be looking at is, I think, hospitalizations and deaths. I mean, that's what you should be looking at. And in that case, the deaths are still, down, and they're going down across the country, but hospitalizations in these situations in Texas are actually, rising some. I would love to know why that is. Anyway, for whatever reason, science is usually wonderful. During this pandemic, it's been pathetic. So they don't even ask the right questions. They don't look at the right data. And so, but if somebody was doing their job, then we would be finding out, why are people going into these hospitals? Is it because people are thinking, well, when I've got the coronavirus, I just go to the hospital now? When that's not what you're supposed to do. It's supposed to be if you need a ventilator, if you're having really trouble breathing, if you're sort of in those more serious stages. So we don't know, but I do think that is the thing to look at, and that justifies being more careful when you see the hospitalizations going to where maybe if it continued at that rate, you would have a problem with, being able to care for everyone.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything Kelly said. The governor's order also suspended elective surgeries in just a list of counties that he designated. Supposedly so that we can free up bed space because increased hospitalization. Why not let the hospital decide if they have enough bed space?
Yeah.
And they know how many people are in their hospitals. They know how much room they need for COVID patients. Why would you just summarily shut it down in these areas, and not let the people on the ground who are dealing with it make that decision? There's no reason for the governor to pick out a few counties, and it's basically where the major metropolitan areas are, Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, Houston, and say, okay, you can't get that hip replacement because we got to save bed space let the hospital decide.
Yeah. And why do it beforehand, right? In other words, why not? Can't you just do that whenever you have a problem with numbers? I mean, if we're not there yet, why are you? Because I think people die because of this, right? I mean,
yes.
People that can't have elective surgeries, it sounds like kind of like, they're having their manicure or pedicure or something, and that's not what this is. I mean, some of these things cost people, and so I don't understand. I've never understood that sort of jumping ahead and saying we're going to stop the elective surgeries now, despite the fact that we've got plenty of room now. We're just worried about what may happen. So I totally agree with Lathan on that. That doesn't make a lot of sense.
Some things that probably don't make some sense, and I had a chance to hear the governor, so now I know why they make some sense, is, why singling out bars? Because that seems to be a hot spot, and there are some really egregious examples, which gets back to your point a little bit. When a bar does it right, they get closed down just like the ones that pack them in, and everybody's talking to everybody and passing on the coronavirus. So that's one, but the one that caused a lot of people to go, what? River rafting trips. What in the world about river rafting trips? Turns out that in order to go upstream, everybody piles into these buses. Nobody's wearing a mask because they're going to be out there in the water in about 15 minutes. So it turns out that the way in which they do these river rafting trips, they were getting hot spots all over these commercial ones.
Wow.
Now, the argument is if you want to go take an inner tube out there and float down on yourself, that's fine. But, because you look at some of these and go, how did that one show up on the list? I could understand the elective surgeries. And again, to answer the question, and I'll go to Kelly for this one, the reason he's doing some of this is because there's a political cost to pay, right?
Yes.
If you're kind of criticize if you do, criticize if you don't. So in some respects, why is the governor telling everybody in the entire state what to do? Only because he's going to have to run for re-election probably.
Well, and here's the bigger issue. This is, to me, the biggest issue in Texas that's not talked about a lot. Does the governor have the authority to do any of this?
Yeah.
I think the answer, again, I haven't looked at it deeply because it's not an issue for us at First Liberty. We haven't had to represent a church or religious liberty issue against the governor. The governor has decided wisely in Texas that, being discriminatory to churches and religious freedom is probably not a good political move.
No.
But the law, as I understand it, says that the governor has, I don't know if it's 30 days or 60 days, but he has the ability to do something, but then the legislature has to do something past that. And we're way past that time.
I'd say so.
But I don't think the legislature wants responsibility, so they're not acting.
We're going to take a break. We have a lot more to cover. COVID-19 in the news. We'll talk about that and then get to some other stories right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
We're a divided country, but it may be worse than we imagined. An article in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences discussed what is called motive attribution asymmetry. That's a technical term for the assumption that your ideology is based in love and your opponent's is based on hate. Put another way, we're the good guys, they're the bad guys. They discovered that the average Republican and the average Democrat today are as divided as the Palestinians and Israelis. In his op-ed in the New York Times, Arthur Brooks says we see the other side as an enemy with whom one cannot negotiate or compromise. He comes to this startling conclusion. People often say that our problem in America is incivility or intolerance. He says that's incorrect. Motive attribution asymmetry leads to something far worse, contempt, which is a noxious brew of anger and disgust. And it is made worse by what he calls the outrage industrial complex that oftentimes caters to one side and criticizes the other. Now, when people hear about political conflicts, they often prescribe the wrong solutions. Just because we disagree doesn't mean we should put aside our disagreements. Arthur Brooks instead says that we need not disagree less. Instead, we need to disagree better. Whether we're discussing politics, economics, or philosophy, we should engage in a robust competition of ideas. We can disagree without being so disagreeable. So he suggests 2 steps. First, turn away from what he calls the rhetorical dope peddlers. These are powerful people on your side who are profiting from the culture of contempt. Second, make a commitment never to treat others with contempt. Christians should be civil and gracious. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition here on Point of View. And if you would like to join us, we'd love to get your comments. 1-800-351-1212. Because we find ourselves right now with a maybe reclosing, at least in part, of the state of Texas. Of course, calling for masks and a number of other issues that certainly you might have some opinions about. So if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Kelly Shackelford, President and CEO of First Liberty, and of course Lathan Watts, who is the Director of Public Affairs there as well. And Lathan, I'm trying to figure out these numbers here because this article I have in front of me here estimates, based on the Johns Hopkins numbers, and again, how accurate are those? As best we can come up with, 124,000 people in the United States have died, and about almost 2.5 million people infected. But 124,000, that's a different number than I heard the future president of the United States, former Vice President Joe Biden, say. So what's going on here?
Yeah, as we say in the South, bless his heart. VP Biden this week claimed that there were 120 million dead due to coronavirus, which, if you remember, not too long ago, he claimed there have been 150 million gun deaths in the country. So in Joe Biden's world, 2/3 of the American population are already dead. So if you're listening, congratulations on surviving the epic slaughter that apparently has gone on in the mind of Joe Biden.
You know, there are some cynics, and I guess I'm starting to be one of those, where I look at, on the one hand, you've got the current president, who's, I think, sometimes has downplayed the virus, the coronavirus, and all sorts of things, and tried to do the best he could, but sometimes got bad information, as we'll talk about in just a few minutes, from Anthony Fauci and people like that. And you go, okay, a lot of people say, well, he's not a very good leader. And then I'm thinking, and I want to turn it over to a man that thinks there's 120 million people that have died. And that wasn't like somebody rushed to stop the broadcast or anything. And I'm sure maybe later they said, well, once in a while you can misspeak, but when you misspeak so often and you sometimes just say things that don't make any sense, and we can play that long list of those if anybody hasn't heard them before, you just got to say, this has got to be troubling to anybody in the Democratic Party right now.
Yeah, that's not a misspeak. I mean, if you watch that clip, anybody who accidentally said 120 million would have corrected it immediately. He didn't. This is a much more serious issue, and I think people realize it's, some sort of, whether it's dementia or something. It's just not all clicking, and I think the president was right when he had his rally last week, and he said, if Joe Biden is president, he'll just be a puppet. I mean, he won't be leading the country. And I think that's why people are supportive of him, right? They know that if they thought he was going to have to lead, I think they might have trouble voting for him. But I think they think, well, there's other people around him that meet my philosophy that are going to be really pulling all the strings. But it's really sad. I mean, even of all people, Donald Trump, okay, not exactly your most sympathetic guy, right? When they told him, I saw the clip of when he was told about it yesterday.
I saw it too.
And his first
Sean Hannity told him.
first comment was that, he felt bad. So that tells you something. That's a pretty extreme situation when Donald Trump responds like that.
I do want to get to maybe a couple of religious liberty issues that you are dealing with, even though we might have to repeat it again for our national audience. But before we do so, a couple of things still on this coronavirus. One of the articles I've posted is the coronavirus may have infected 10 times more Americans than known. We have the possibility that 25 million Americans had the virus. And the fact that they had it, and again, the only reason we can come up with that is we've had about 2.4 million people that have tested positive for it. So you run the extrapolations, and I think the math is pretty solid on that to show that a very significant number of people probably are what we call asymptomatic. So this is the difficulty in trying to even contain what's happening in Arizona, Texas, Oklahoma, Florida, and places like that right now, is that you can go out to a grocery store and maybe even talk to a neighbor, and maybe just for a moment you don't have a mask on, and you're within about 4 feet of them, and they actually can spread the virus to you, and you don't even know that you had it because you didn't know that you had it, and then maybe even you get it and you don't know you have it, but it's spreading whether we like it or not.
Right, or march shoulder to shoulder with 10,000 of your closest friends to protest, in downtown major metropolitan areas. I can't imagine that had anything to do with the current spike in cases. Or for border states, what hasn't been talked about a whole lot is there's been a recent increase in border crossings.
Right.
So people coming from Central and South America and Mexico, and when it was present there, and when they hit their spike, and now so you have like the initial wave, and then you have the wave that hit Central South America. Now coming into some of the border states where you see these increase in numbers. And
that's certainly both the Arizona, New Mexico is the outlier, but otherwise Arizona, Texas, Florida, all of those,
But if that's the case, and we've talked about, can we really know how many people have it? But even, accepting that number, if that's the case, that 10 times more people had it than we thought, that means the mortality rate's even lower than we thought.
Probably is.
It's actually really good news, right?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the asymptomatic carrier is the sort of the straw man or the boogeyman that a lot of people have used to say this is why we have to lock everybody down, because we don't know who has it, and you can have it and not know it, and that's why you're selfish and wanting to kill people if you don't wear a mask. But you're depending on who you listen to, because the government's position on things seems to change week by week. Just take the mask issue in and of itself.
Anthony Fauci, I have got articles here where he has said everything across the board, across the spectrum. I just is amazing to me now as I went back and dug them all out.
Right.
Unbelievable.
And I'm blanking on who I think it was CDC that put out a thing about the how low actually the risk is of a asymptomatic carrier spreading it. That you really have to be in contact with somebody who is suffering, who has the symptoms.
That's right.
And have exposure to them over an extended period of time. So obviously people in healthcare, who are treating with patients, yes, absolutely. That's a huge,
that's why they're wearing
huge risk.
Face masks and all sorts of other things, and gloves and gowns and the whole bit.
Exactly.
Ultraviolet radiation.
But even in that, even in a hospital environment, I mean, people know if they've listened to that. I was in the hospital recently. I didn't have to when I was being transferred from my room to downstairs radiology to get angiogram, brain, and all that. That was the only time that I had to.
Yes. That
they required me to wear a mask was when I was in the hallway around other people. They had completely isolated the COVID patients in their own ICU. It was one of the first things I asked because I knew I was going to get asked about it by my wife and kids when they called. Is hey, how many COVID patients do you have here? And they said, none on this wing. We have them in their own. We have multiple ICUs here. They have their own. The people that work that ICU don't work this ICU. So
Very smart.
Yeah, exactly. I think the point is it can be dealt with, and we are dealing with it. And I think that's why Abbott is getting hit from all sides for this sort of knee-jerk reaction to just a spike in the number of cases, as I've said before, not hospitalizations or deaths, a spike in the number of cases, and everybody freaks out again.
Well, let me take a break, but when we come back, we'll get into some other issues. And one to maybe even set up all our religious liberty issues is the American Enterprise Institute did a very extensive survey, 3,500 Americans, and asked, do you feel comfortable, somewhat comfortable, very comfortable attending in-person worship services? And what they found is there's still a fairly significant number of Americans that aren't comfortable going back to religious services. And so we did talk about that with Jackie Deason yesterday. We've talked about it with both of you before, but I thought we might come back to that for a minute and then get into some of these religious liberty issues, because if nothing else, there are still some people that aren't so sure, and we've been kind of watching what happens not only in the small churches, but also in some of the mega churches. And Kelly and I haven't been in our church, and those are mega churches, so we'll see where that gets us in just a minute. Let me just mention, as we go to a break, though, we now have a matching fund of $50,000, up to $50,000. So as we come to the end of the fiscal year, which is next Tuesday, if I got that right, June 30th, we certainly need to hear from you. And if you've enjoyed the conversations we've had over the years with people like Kelly Shackelford and Lathan Watts and Penna Dexter and others, and appreciate the news information commentary, I would encourage you to click on that button, which says "For Such a Time as This." It's actually counting down and says 4 days, 11 hours, 31 minutes. I'm sure Kelly knows that too, because the other thing we want to do today is not only encourage you to support Point of View, but to support First Liberty. They have certainly been on the cutting edge of all of these issues in terms of opening up these churches and dealing with First Amendment issues. And didn't I hear the other day 200 federal judges? Okay, so there's just a lot of things they've done, and they are certainly worthy of your support as well. So we've got a link there, and if you'd like to support us, use that link. And then if you look at the link underneath either of these individuals, you can support them as well, and that's what I do. We'll be right back.
America's major media are out of control. Many of them apparently believe their role is to publish things that create hysteria and outrage with false narratives, and facts don't matter. You don't believe that. Neither do we at Point of View. Truth matters. Facts matter. And that's why Kerby Anderson and the team at Point of View matter. Together, we bring the information you need to rightly respond to what's happening. And Point of View's ability to perform that role in the second half of 2020 will be determined over the next handful of hours. June is the end of our fiscal year, and your partnership today will help us set our budget for the coming months. You and Point of View, a powerful team for such a time as this. And right now, every gift you give will be doubled up to $50,000. So double your investment when you join the team online at pointofview.net/team or by phone 800-347-5151. Don't wait. Visit or call now. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. And again, we are privileged to have with us today Kelly Shackelford, Lathan Watts, and I thought we might talk about some of the religious liberty issues, but before we do, there is a connection between the two, and that is this survey done by the American Enterprise Institute, which I looked at the entire survey. It's asking a lot of other questions that have nothing to do with churches, but about COVID and a variety of others. But it was striking to see that 64%, so almost two-thirds, said they were either somewhat uncomfortable or very uncomfortable about attending in-person worship services. And some of that has been generated by the fact that you've had a few places where there have been some outbreaks in Oregon and others. But also some of that had to do with the fact, and this now plays right into the things you've been talking about, Kelly, is whether or not our church is going to get in trouble if we actually even follow the CDC guidelines and convene church. So there's a little bit of fear on the part of people, even though we've tried to allay some of that here on Point of View.
Yeah, I mean, imagine that the enemy would use fear to try to keep people out of church, right? And if you do this polling correctly, and it's all about what questions you ask,
yes,
right?
Of course.
And so, if you ask just a broad question, do you feel safe going to church? It's like, well, what are they doing? Are they careful? Are they trying to be safe? If you put the words like, do you have a fear going into a church that's safely attempting to meet all the guidelines and protect their people?
Maybe that would lower.
Yeah, I think that would be dramatically different. And of course, the reality is 99 point whatever percent. I mean, unless your church is like, I don't know, in the swamp somewhere, or it's somebody really, really, really different, they're going to be doing all this. And I think the churches are going to be much more safe than other places you're already going right now. Do you have those thoughts? I mean, ask yourself this question. Are you more, in your own mind right now, are you more frightened about going back to your church versus going to the grocery store or Home Depot or whatever? And if you are, then ask yourself, have I been manipulated by what's going on? I mean, church is 1 hour, right? Once a week. You're going in these places all the time. Church is intentionally separating you by pews, only families together. I mean, they're giving everybody a mask. They're doing all these things that is not happening in these other places you are going. When you go to Home Depot and you grab something, how many people touched that before you touched it? That's not happening at a church because they're wiping everything down in between services. So, ask yourself what you're thinking, and then ask yourself, man, is the media really manipulating people to make the church like the dangerous place? And my favorite was the Roberts comment. It's just one of the, just one of the most foolish comments ever. That when he said, well, the difference out in California between, the religious services and like a laundromat is that, people, they stay for a extended period of time in the church. And I was like, he's never been to a laundromat. I mean, it's just silly. So they've really kind of made this fear. And the reality is your church probably isn't opening up in a lot of places. That's because they're being safe. They're making sure that they can keep all their people safe. When they do open up, you can be assured they're going to be really safe. They're going to be much more safe than probably almost all the other places you're going to. So we really do need to get that, and it's not like they have to figure out all the guidelines. I mean, they're all out there that tells them, here are some things you might want to think about. If you've got a plate that's got like, you're doing the Lord's Supper, maybe there's a different way to do that. They've thought through these things. I mean, there are options out there for people to make sure you can come back to church. And by the way, if we don't need to be reminded, church comes from the word ecclesia, which means coming together. I mean,
right.
Online church is not really church. Let's be honest. It's like an intellectual message and a spiritual message, but it's not church. we need to be with people. And so as soon as possible, we need to get into those situations, being smart, being wise, being safe. But there's a lot of fear that is, I think, obviously being used by the enemy to keep people from church.
And again, taking into account all of Kelly's comments about the poll and how you ask a question, I totally agree with all that. But even if you accept the result of that poll, to me, the question is who decides? Okay? If you're worried about going to church, then you decide. Stay home.
And they're
most
probably
churches
going
are
to do that. Yeah.
still going to do things. Lots of churches would live stream their services even before COVID. So that should be your decision, not the government's decision, to say, well, this is, people sit a long time at church versus a laundromat. So it's okay for California to shut down churches. I mean, that was one of the dumber things I've ever heard a Supreme Court justice say. And he went out of his way to say it. They could have mooted that case and not even had to issue that opinion. So ultimately, for me, the big question is, again, who decides? And the ends do not justify the means. Even if the policy outcome is one that you agree with, if it was reached by, unconstitutional means, that should negate it, which gets to, recent decisions from the Supreme Court, and there'll be more coming out that I'm sure we're going to talk about.
And there's a whole area here that I have yet to see explored in any opinions, which is, there is a big difference between how the court should treat an order, from one executive official somewhere, whether it's a mayor or a county judge or a county commissioner or a governor. There's a big difference between how they should treat that and how they should treat something that's gone through the legislative process. And I am seeing no analysis of that at all, because I think they're just not used to this. And instead, they're giving all this deference because there's a compelling reason, as far as a compelling interest that the government's trying to meet.
Right.
But I really think there's a lot of work that needs to be done here constitutionally. And by the way, if people don't know, I mean, we at First Liberty, we've had a ton of these cases on churches. We've won every single one of them. Okay, and people can go to our website and it says, I think, COVID cases or victories or whatever, and they can, and it says the same thing about it, guidelines for your church. So we have all that kind of stuff there. But the battle is crazy right now in this area with churches. It is up in the air. Just in the Seventh Circuit, I guess 2 weeks ago, we've got a horrible decision that basically says the church is like a lower rung of protection. And then at the same time, days later, maybe 3 or 4 days later, you've got Judge Jim Ho from the Fifth Circuit counteracting that with a decision that says, oh, no, that's not the way things work under our Constitution. So that's at the Court of Appeals. That's right underneath the Supreme Court, the Federal Court of Appeals. This battle is still going on as to whether the government can control the church and even treat the church discriminatory. And so, this has got to be fought out, because if we end all this pandemic and the law is, well, if there's an emergency,
then you lose all your rights.
Then guess what happens? We just lost all of our rights.
So lose everything.
So we've got to win this case, and we've got to get good analysis from the court eventually. And look, we can talk later about this. We analyzed all these judges. We warned about what Gorsuch did in this case. We warned people that this was a soft spot for him on the transgender issue. But I will say this. I do think, and people are going to be shocked when I say, even Roberts, even Gorsuch, I think we have 5 very solid votes on religious freedom. Obviously, they've been very disappointing to people in a lot of other issues, but I do think we've got 5 solid votes on religious freedom. They have yet, on a merits case, to ever vote, that wasn't the right way on religious freedom that we've seen. They might disappoint us there. I think we need to get something there that's a merits case, that's a good case, so that we can make sure that the new normal after the pandemic is not that we've all lost constitutional rights.
Very good. When we come back from the break, our first article there is actually a link to your briefing, and it's entitled Defining Moments for Religious Freedom. And it is a piece that you did with Dr. Al Mohler, or Professor Al Mohler, and we had him on recently to talk about the Gathering Storm. He's really quite a Winston Churchill fan, so he used the same title as, of course, that famous book. And growing up, we had the entire set of Winston Churchill books in my bedroom. That's where my dad used to keep a lot of his books. Anyway, so I've always grown up seeing The Gathering Storm. By the way, it's a very good book. And for some people that say, I'd like to kind of understand this whole idea of religious freedom, we have Stuart Shepard as the host, we have Kelly Shackelford, and we have Al Mohler. You can't do any better than that, can you? I mean, it's pretty good stuff, unless, of course, you got a Lathan Watts humorous video here to educate us as well. So we'll come back and talk about some of those defining moments in religious liberty. Then we're going to get into, in the next hour, some of these really important cases that First Liberty's been involved with, as well as the whole issue of the pandemic. All that coming up right after this.
The extensive looting and rioting, piggybacking on the peaceful protests in response to the death of George Floyd, are disastrously counterproductive. Criminals and extremists are piling up damages that will result in costs to minority communities they claim to represent, for years to come. Wall Street Journal columnist Jason Riley provides some history to show that peaceful civil rights demonstrations get better results. He points out two consequential laws affecting African Americans, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, came as a result of Martin Luther King-style peaceful protesting. By contrast, he writes, recent history has not been especially kind to militant efforts to advance racial equality. Princeton scholar Omar Wasow has conducted a 15-year research project on the consequences of political protests. From his study of Black-led demonstrations between 1960 and 1972, he concluded that nonviolent Black-led protests played a critical role in tilting the national political agenda toward civil rights. But, he says, Black-led resistance that included protester-initiated violence contributed to outcomes directly in opposition to the policy preferences of the protesters. Violent protests followed the April 1968 assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. In his study, Mr. Wasow, who is Black himself, found that voters in counties closer to violent protests supported Richard Nixon over incumbent Hubert Humphrey by 6 to 8 percentage points. There's a lesson here for the 2020 election. Jason Riley warns politicians against allowing violent protesters to become the face of their party, and against indulging radical demands made by these protesters. He again takes us back to the Nixon presidency when advisor Daniel Patrick Moynihan pointed to a silent Black majority whose concerns did not dovetail with the Black Power movement of the day. There are minority-owned businesses destroyed in the current riots. Violence undermines reform and can turn elections. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let me just mention real quickly that we have the first article here, Defining Moments for Religious Freedom. And it is a great interview that you did with Al Mohler. And for people that are not familiar, Kelly, maybe you can give us some background, because you've had Dinesh D'Souza and you've had, of course, Al Mohler, and we can go through the long list of individuals that you've had. And almost every Thursday, there's an opportunity to hear some real good newsmaker on an issue of importance. So I provided this on our website. Of course, they can go to firstliberty.org but we've made it real easy where you can just click on it. It pops up, and it's 35 minutes long, and so you can actually watch it instantaneously, but then we also have a link so that you can sign up, because I think people can actually make sure that they get this on a regular basis,
yeah,
right?
if they go to your link there at pointofview.net, and it'll take them, and they can see some of the past. There's a number of just excellent. They're just like 30 minutes, 35 minutes. The Dinesh D'Souza interview I thought was excellent. If those don't know, Dinesh is coming out with a new book and a new movie. I think it's the United States of Socialism or something like that. And so what a time for that, right? I mean, at the time when all this craziness is happening, when you have people, the sort of Marxist revolution is being attempted at the same time. So it was a fascinating interview, and we always talk about religious freedom and how that connects. And people can not only watch those old ones that we've done over the past few weeks, but they can even just click on a deal and make sure that they get invited to the ones in the future so that they can see, who we're having on next and the interviews that we're doing.
Well, shout out to Karen, because she does have that link there, and so you can see Dinesh D'Souza, you can see Ted Cruz, you can see some of the military stuff that you've done there. We can see, of course, Colonel Allen West, and I mean, just all the material right there. So that is a separate link for you to sign up and also to get that. But you were probably listening to it, so what's your thought?
I always enjoy listening to people who are smarter than me talk about things that I'm interested in.
Raises my IQ every time that happens.
Yeah, exactly, right? Exactly. Sometimes the better part of wisdom is knowing when to just be quiet and listen. And so, and lots of these interviews, particularly the most recent one with Dr. Moeller and Kelly, that was certainly the case there. Kelly mentioned, I think maybe during the break, how the analogy between judges reinterpreting statutes and religious leaders reinterpreting Scripture, and that the results are disastrous both times. In either case. Right. That was part of that interview that I particularly enjoyed.
Al Mohler, when we were asked about the Bostock decision, the transgender deal where Gorsuch went through these mental gymnastics he was supposed to be the Scalia guy, the originalist, go to the original meaning. And then he goes to the statute that was passed in 1964 that used the word sex, and everybody knows what they meant in 1964. And then he sort of, morphs it into today, saying, no, sex now means transgender, sexual orientation. And so Stewart just asked a question. What does that mean? What is the effect of when you start reinterpreting words like that? And so Al, it was funny. I thought it was interesting because Al Mohler was like immediately talking about that's exactly our problem with pastors who are doing this with Scripture. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, that's a really good point. And then my natural reaction was, what does it mean to the rule of law as a lawyer? So because if words change meaning and they really aren't determinative, you can't tell, then you don't have the rule of law. You don't have certainty. You can't depend upon anything that the law says because they could just change it. When they want to change the meaning of the words, then the law changes its meaning. So it's damaging in a lot of ways, but it's interesting how what happens in the church is what's happening, with our system and with law. And so I thought that was a good conversation, and I would have never thought to go that direction, but Al Mohler immediately, that was where he was looking as soon as that question was brought up.
This one little booklet I did a while back on constitutional interpretation. Don't claim to be a lawyer, don't play one on television, but the analogy I've used for people that don't have your legal background is just imagine if you write a will, and then when you die, maybe 20, 30, 50 years later, the lawyer looks at the will and says, well, I know that's what it says, but that's really not what it means, and to change the will, well, if you were still alive, you'd be upset if that was happening, but certainly your children and grandchildren would be upset and say, no, that you have to interpret that when it was written. And even people that are maybe believing we have a living constitution realize, boy, once you start down that road where words can be redefined, where sex can now mean sexual orientation and transgenderism, I doubt you could find anybody in 1964, except a few places where I lived in the San Francisco Bay Area, wouldn't even know what transgenderism was. was. And yet that's exactly what was thrust into that particular opinion, wasn't it?
That's exactly what he did. He went back and rewrote a statute. Because just as Kelly said, that statute was passed, it was the Civil Rights Act, Title VII, 1964. But he did sort of contort himself. I mean, it was almost impressive, if it wasn't so sad, to say that this was somehow a textualist view of the statute.
Sorry.
So if you're going to take a textualist view of the statute and what it meant at the accepted meaning at the time that statute was passed, well, then you have to consider that the official policy of the U.S. government was, by this definition, discriminatory against people based on sexual orientation. So they would have then been passing a statute that conflicted with their own official policy. Let alone the fact, if you want to get into like the legislative history and the legislative intent, which sometimes textualists will do if there is dispute as to what that original meaning was. Okay, go back and look what the legislature said when they were passing it. The congressman that added sex in the list of things that was going to be protected, some at the time thought that it was added as a poison pill.
Yes, there's pretty good
by people who did not want that law to be passed. Okay,
yes,
so if that was his intent,
was the case. Yeah.
You would think in 1964 that sexual orientation and transgenderism would have been an even worse poison pill than the definition of sex. If that was the case, you'd think he probably would have said so. So it is the opening sentence of the dissent in Bostock by Alito and Thomas is better than any analysis. You can the whole opinion's fantastic, but the opening sentence is there's only one word for the court's action: legislation. They rewrote a statute, and that's what I was talking about before. Even if you agree with the outcome, okay, even if you can say, you know what, we've decided we're going to protect sexual orientation and transgender at the same level as sex, gender, race, religion. Even if that's your policy preference, the ends do not justify the means. The proper body to update a statute is the legislature.
They created the original one.
They wrote it.
Yes.
It's their job to update it. And so that is not what the court is there for. Their job is to say what the law is, not what it should be. And the fact, again, that from a textualist standpoint, if that's really what it meant in 1964, then why have they been trying to amend this several times? It's never passed, but they've been trying to amend it for years. If it really meant that before, why do they need to amend it?
And one of the reasons you don't do it is because, I mean, chaos is a light word for what they've just opened up.
Oh, yes.
We can talk more about after the break on this, but I mean, I've been on calls, the slew of litigation that's now going to be unleashed because it wasn't done through the legislative process where people understand what it means and cabined in. There's going to be massive litigation involving religious freedom and other issues that are now all going to have to worked out.
We'll take a break, and then we will be back right after these messages.
America's major media are out of control. Many of them apparently believe their role is to publish things that create hysteria and outrage with false narratives, and facts don't matter. You don't believe that. Neither do we at Point of View. Truth matters. Facts matter. And that's why Kerby Anderson and the team at Point of View matter. Together, we bring the information you need to rightly respond to what's happening. And Point of View's ability to perform that role in the second half of 2020 will be determined over the next handful of hours. June is the end of our fiscal year, and your partnership today will help us set our budget for the coming months. You and Point of View, a powerful team for such a time as this. And right now, every gift you give will be doubled up to $50,000. So double your investment when you join the team online at pointofview.net/team or by phone 800-347-5151. Don't wait. Visit or call now. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is our weekend edition, and we are just thrilled that we have around the round table, of course, Kelly Shackelford is oftentimes here, President and CEO of First Liberty, and of course, an individual that's here on a pretty regular basis, as well as Lathan Watts, Director of Public Affairs at First Liberty. Our first article, which we'll come back to later, is the Thursday First Liberty briefing, which is entitled Defining Moments for Religious Freedom. But I thought we'd get to the second article because it's kind of front and center. If you go to the Drudge Report or anything else, they're all talking about that today the governor of the state of Texas took a pretty dramatic step, and that is changed the direction of the opening of the state, shutting bars back down. That happened about an hour ago. Scaling back restaurant capacity to 50%, shutting down river rafting trips, banned outdoor gatherings of more than 100 people, all because you are starting to see a very significant uptick. He has said in the past that if indeed you had about a 4 or 5% positivity rate, that would be okay. But once it got to be more than 10%, that would be a real concern. It is already at 11.76% in the state of Texas, above even the 10% threshold he talked about before. Now, I use that to say that Texas is not the only state. If you look at the states right now that are actually increasing in the number of cases, Arizona, Oklahoma, Texas, Florida, Michigan, to mention just a few, and then, of course, you've had some that have been declining in the Northeast. But in very few places are we seeing a decline. And so that is going to be something that's going to be front and center. And it may change maybe the possibility of how some of the churches handle this. I have mentioned before the survey that was done where about 2/3 of at least Christians asked if they were uncomfortable or very uncomfortable about going to in-person services, and a number of them were. Matter of fact, the only religious group which was comfortable with church reopenings, evangelicals, which I thought was kind of interesting. That's another part of that survey. Anyway, Kelly Shackelford, we are seeing an uptick in the number of cases. The deaths have dropped a little bit, but again, there's a concern that we don't want to overwhelm the hospital situation in the country.
Yeah, and this is where it gets more difficult because many of the public officials, the public health officials, have been so unreliable in what they've been telling us that nobody's sure. I mean, and the media has been hysterical, right? I mean, it's all about how many cases there are, which is a totally irrelevant figure. I mean, they know that they don't know how many cases there are. I mean, what the Penn State or whatever the report that just came through, they're like maybe tens of millions off on how many people. All they know is how many people they've tested and found have it, and now that they're testing more, they get more results. The issue has always been what is happening in the hospitals. You know, are we increasing the number such that we could overwhelm our hospitals? That, our healthcare system, that is what has always been the issue. And in that case, I know at least Texas, I haven't looked at the others, but the hospitalizations are increasing some. And so that's something to and the rate of infections that they're testing. They're testing, and it's a higher percentage of people as they're testing that are now, being shown to be positive. So there's something there. But I can just say this: Governor Abbott in Texas is taking it from both sides. Yes. He's getting attacked by the people that are more fearful and say, you open things up too quickly. Look at all this trouble you're causing. And then you get hit on the other side from the people who are more conservative and more, pro-liberty. It's saying, what are you doing trying to force people to wear masks and all this stuff you're doing? So he's kind of getting it from both sides in the process. But I think the real problem with all of us here is, gosh, if there was just some public health officials that we could trust, that, and I don't mean they're trying to lie. I mean, don't say things emphatically if they're not true. And because, Fauci's got statements on every side of everything at this point, if you look over the past, 4 months or whatever. And that's a problem. And so it's hard to figure out sometimes. So I think everybody's almost looking for somebody who they can trust that can talk about the real issue of whether this is something to worry about or whether it's something we don't worry about.
Kevin Williamson was talking about the fact that this is going to be used politically. I know that surprises everybody around the table, but he says, the issue is you can't do it too easily, because you can say, okay, well, let's look at Texas and we can get all upset with Governor Abbott. We can look at Florida, get all upset about Governor Ron DeSantis. But one of the others is California. Oops, well, that's not exactly. So, yes, right at the moment, some more of them tend to be red states. Some of the blue states aren't so bad because they've already been through that. But there are going to be some people that are going to use this politically, and that's another real concern about how this is going to play out in a presidential election.
Yes, but I want to go back to something that Kelly was talking about also, because one of the things I think this whole pandemic and the whole crisis and how it's been dealt with has, one of the things that's a concern to me was how it seemed so many people in the country were so eager to look to government for a top-down, one-size-fits-all solution, instead of dealing with it from the bottom up. Like Abbott, like we said, here in Texas is catching heat from all sides, and one of the things he did was ban elective surgeries in certain counties where major metropolitan areas are, again, trying to save hospital beds. Well, why not let the hospital decide? Yeah. Now, the hospital knows how many beds they have. They know how many beds they need, and if they're getting overwhelmed, then they can go to either the city or the county or maybe eventually the state. But from day one, it was like everybody, what is President Trump going to do about this? And it was almost this calling for a massive top-down solution, one size fits all, to fix this. When shocker, life in Texas is different than life in California, and it's different than New York City and Dallas. You have the populations are different, and the population density is certainly different in downtown Manhattan
than rural.
Than it is, than in rural, but even in two major metropolitan areas. There's much more space in Dallas downtown than there is in Manhattan. The solution for New York may not work for Dallas, including putting COVID-positive patients back in nursing homes. Thank you, Governor Cuomo. Yes, if you're going to talk about who's up and who's down politically, it does get touchy because you do have to deal with hindsight's always 20/20, but mistakes made by people on all sides of the partisan aisle.
One of the things I want to talk about after the break is just even will it make it more difficult to travel? All three of us around this table are going to be doing some traveling soon. And I just mentioned the other day that New York is starting to say, we might not in New York and New Jersey and Connecticut allow somebody to come from Texas unless they are actually quarantined for 14 days. Well, I know one of my trips will be to a Labor Day camp in upstate New York and the beautiful areas there, but that would change that. And we come back, now the EU is starting to say, the number of cases and the infection rates you have in the United States would cause us to say that we could not allow anybody from the United States to come to Europe. And, of course, if you're in the vacation business or you are actually an international traveler, you can begin to see there are some real issues surfacing right now with the COVID-19 cases. So we're going to talk about that for a little bit longer. Then we will get into a number of these religious liberty cases. But if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. It looks like we're reversing the opening up. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
We're a divided country, but it may be worse than we imagined. An article in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences discussed what is called motive attribution asymmetry. That's a technical term for the assumption that your ideology is based in love and your opponent's is based on hate. Put another way, we're the good guys, they're the bad guys. They discovered that the average Republican and the average Democrat today are as divided as the Palestinians and Israelis. In his op-ed in the New York Times, Arthur Brooks says we see the other side as an enemy with whom one cannot negotiate or compromise. He comes to this startling conclusion. People often say that our problem in America is incivility or intolerance. He says that's incorrect. Motive attribution asymmetry leads to something far worse, contempt, which is a noxious brew of anger and disgust. And it is made worse by what he calls the outrage industrial complex that oftentimes caters to one side and criticizes the other. Now, when people hear about political conflicts, they often prescribe the wrong solutions. Just because we disagree doesn't mean we should put aside our disagreements. Arthur Brooks instead says that we need not disagree less. Instead, we need to disagree better. Whether we're discussing politics, economics, or philosophy, we should engage in a robust competition of ideas. We can disagree without being so disagreeable. So he suggests 2 steps. First, turn away from what he calls the rhetorical dope peddlers. These are powerful people on your side who are profiting from the culture of contempt. Second, make a commitment never to treat others with contempt. Christians should be civil and gracious. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, it is Weekend Edition, and we are so privileged to have with us today Kelly Shackelford, Lathan Watts. And let me just explain for a minute this thing from the EU, for example. Some of you might be saying, boy, in the fall we thought we might go to Europe, or maybe you're a business person, you wanted to go there, and what's that all about? Well, they have a criteria. It's pretty straightforward. It's EU plus area. It's Schengen states plus non-EU members, and I won't go into all of that. And so basically, if your country is in better or equal shape to where the European Union is, the welcome mat is out. But if you are worse, in some cases 7 or 8 times worse, that would be China, Cuba, Uganda, Brazil, Russia, and the United States. Oops. Then the no vacancy sign goes out. So we're seeing some people making some threats in between states here. And for all 3 of us that do some traveling occasionally in the United States, that's enough. But then for some of us that travel, as I do, and I know Kelly has had some plans too, traveling overseas, you didn't see COVID-19 all of a sudden stopping even the possibility of traveling, right?
Yeah, it's crazy. And again, the problem with a lot of this is it's really bad science. I mean, again, we've got a report coming out that we missed, 10 or 20 million people who are positive. So the numbers that they're basing this on are not even accurate numbers. And we all know they're not accurate numbers. Like, what is your percent if, in other words, if a gazillion people have this and only a few people are going in the hospital, then it's really a very different scenario than if it's, 10 times less than that, and that same number is going to the hospital. So that's what's sad about all this is there's a lot of, it just seems really foolish. I don't. It's just odd that we're operating this way, and it seems a lot of hysteria, a lot of fear, and we want to be safe and smart, but there are things we can actually see, like how many people are in the hospital, how many people are dying. Those numbers in the United States are going down. And yet the media, they want to make sure it's not a story if there's not something really tragic going on. Right. Plus they hate Trump and they think that'll maybe help be anti-Trump. And so it's all about how many cases there are and all these things that are really irrelevant. It just means they test more, and some of these things are ticking up in some of these places, in as far as hospitalizations and all that, and they're watching over that. But I just think it's odd that we seem to have always been sort of almost acting like, junior high science people or something, the whole time. And you would think we would get our best with this, and we haven't been. We've been getting a lot of shoddy thinking and shoddy information that really a lot of times is really irrelevant.
You did mention that in passing, so let me just say the third article here is from The Hill, which is, of course, the very important journalistic record of Capitol Hill, and it estimates, based on the numbers from the CDC and the number of people that have been tested so far, that probably it's closer to 25 million Americans have contracted the coronavirus, which is 10 times higher the number of confirmed cases. So Kelly's point is well taken. There are a lot
only
of people
20-something million off, right? They said it was 2 million, but it's only 20 million or so off.
Yeah. So again, that may be good news. First of all, it means that some of you listening right now have the virus, didn't know you had it, or had such mild symptoms you didn't know you have it. It means that the death rate is lower, probably, because we now know the number of cases. And so those are some things we might want to add. But already I got some people want to ask some practical questions, and I got two individuals that have had to deal with some of these church issues. So let's go to Georgia first, WLPE. Marcella, thank you for calling today.
Hello.
Yes.
How are you?
I'm good. What would you like to ask or say?
Wonderful. Well, I know this and that has to be done, and we have to participate, get along, and all that stuff there. But things like church services and maybe health club activities, I mean, those kind of things, could they be done outside? Last week, some months ago, I had put some books on hold at the library, and last week, out of the blue, somebody called me and told me I could get my movie. And what had happened was they came out and met me at the curb.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Let's get to some comments here for just a minute, because she's asking about outside, and of course, I would imagine Governor Brian Kemp in Georgia would allow that. But Kelly, that was your first case, wasn't it? Right?
Yeah, the first set of cases we had representing churches were churches who were doing drive-in services where they were in their cars in the church parking lot, and then you can either have somebody who's speaking from a bullhorn, is speaking to a radio frequency that is in the cars. Obviously, there's zero issue there, and unbelievably, because of, again, a lot of, governors, mayors, people who were just completely nonsensical, they were trying to ban this. Like the new CDC regulation that we had never seen was that you could catch the coronavirus from one automobile to another, which is, is silly. So the churches have been real creative, and again, kind of like Lathan was talking about earlier, is you really need to deal with these situations locally, because it's one thing when you're in a rural community and you have a church and there's almost no cases anywhere in the area, and the church has plenty of room to space everybody out, to have a pew between, to have 6 feet between families, to clean everything up, to make sure everything's safe. And again, much safer than when you go to the grocery store or Home Depot or wherever else you're going. That's very different than like if you're in the middle of New York City during a hot time, right? And so in those cases, it might be that you can't, there's just nothing you can do, so you got to go online. But churches know this. Churches are going to be safer than anybody else. I think they care about their people. They're going to be, and the guidelines are out there for them. And so you're going to find this different around the country based upon what the scenario that they're in. But I think in most places, you can do as, again, if you're not a huge church, it's much harder when you get that big. But most churches are 500 or less. And most of them can handle this, whether they have to do an extra service or whether, but they can spread people out. They can make sure everything's clean. They can do things in a way that are safe and protective. Outside's even more safe, obviously, if you can do that. But it's pretty hot in a lot of places, so I don't know if the people would get hurt that way as well.
Marcel was asking a question, and we do have a link to firstliberty.org. The link at the very top says COVID-19, and then if you go down, it gives you COVID-19 victories, resources, podcast, leading the effort. So that's where you can find some of those guidelines, because some of these churches now, because there's kind of a closing down of the reopening, is that a way to say it? In at least some of these states, they might really be going, well, maybe we just have to close the church again. And there are ways to do this safely. Now, there have been a few churches, quite honestly, because in that survey I just mentioned a minute ago, they were pointing out one in Oregon that just almost everybody in the church was infected because they probably didn't follow the right guidelines. So wisdom and a little bit of intelligence and applying some of those guidelines worked pretty well. And if nothing else, I didn't think that First Liberty, Lathan, would have to do so much work to defend religious liberty during a pandemic, but I was wrong.
I think it took a lot of people by surprise, the reaction, and then how some would characterize the overreaction, especially local mayors and county judges who just really, just kind of seized the emergency moment and just started dictating things. Fortunately, we haven't had to challenge these types of situations on what do you have the authority to do this. Yes. It's been what you have done is in violation of
equal protection,
right. The First Amendment. If you're going to treat churches differently than you're treating other organizations, that's wrong on a lot of levels. We don't even have to get to the point of, you're a mayor, where did you get the authority to do this? Or you're a county judge and the county commission hasn't acted, where did you get the authority to do this? Or depending on what state you're in, you're a governor, your legislature hasn't acted, where did you get the authority to do this? You can just take what they did and say, this violates the First Amendment. And we've been very successful doing that.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we will get into some more practical aspects. We also have a couple of cases. You might remember Gail Blair, the blind woman evangelist, and we'll get an update on that. A new case out of Delaware, so we'll talk about that. And as you go to the website to find some of these articles and resources, we have a banner there that says, for such a time as this. And if you were listening yesterday, you know that we now have a $50,000 matching fund. It only qualifies if we get it. We have to tell them in the deed that we raised that money, so certainly we need to hear from you. But it's a dollar-to-dollar match, so if you would want to give to Point of View $50, it becomes $100, $100 becomes $200. You can find it at pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
America's major media are out of control. Many of them apparently believe their role is to publish things that create hysteria and outrage with false narratives, and facts don't matter. You don't believe that. Neither do we at Point of View. Truth matters. Facts matter. And that's why Kerby Anderson and the team at Point of View matter. Together, we bring the information you need to rightly respond to what's happening. And Point of View's ability to perform that role in the second half of 2020 will be determined over the next handful of hours. June is the end of our fiscal year, and your partnership today will help us set our budget for the coming months. You and Point of View, a powerful team for such a time as this. And right now, every gift you give will be doubled up to $50,000. So double your investment when you join the team online at pointofview.net/team or by phone 800-347-5151. Don't wait. Visit or call now. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition, and if you would like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Kelly Shackelford and Lathan Watts with us. We've been talking about COVID-19. I'm going to get into religious liberty in just a minute. The two are sort of connected, and I think we can certainly see that. So let's go to another phone call. Steve in Colorado. Steve, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. And I haven't been listening for a while. You guys might have pointed this out. I think you've done a really good job at pointing out that it's not the cases that matter, it's the hospitalizations and the mortality. The other thing is we've been making decisions without much information, but as we gather information, you have to change the decisions that you make.
Yes.
So we've learned really that the mortality is age-based. Mm-hmm. So if you're an elementary school kid, your risk is not zero, but close to zero. Mm-hmm. If you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, it's close to zero. Once you get into your 60s, 70s, and 80s, it's much higher. So shutting down the entire economy doesn't make any sense. What we need to do is find those people who really are at risk, which is probably the folks in the nursing homes, and say, how do we protect them without compromising our entire economy?
And again, about 80% of those deaths have been over the age of 65. So again, I think your point is very well taken. So very good. And
we need to use the data that we have to make decisions now, and they're not doing that.
Yes. And, I wrote a piece a while back that was in one of these, I guess it was a Christian Post, and, people say, trust the science. I said, I trust the science, but when they said trust the science, they mean the models. And I said, wait a minute. I put myself through graduate school doing computer models, and I can guarantee you that the model's only as good as the data. When the data started out and it came from Imperial College in London, it was as wrong as it possibly could be. That's the case. You don't have to look at the models now. You can look at the data. And then once you use the data, then you can make wiser decisions.
Exactly. And again, one of the things that's not a predictive model is how many people are in the hospitals, how many people are needing ventilators, how many people, because, look, even if our hospital numbers are going up, but we figured out how to save their lives because we've learned.
Yes.
Then
the therapeutics that they call it.
Yeah.
Even though we don't have a vaccine.
Yeah. There's lots of theories on this. I've heard people giving large doses of vitamin D. There's all kinds of different things being tried. Everything I hear, and again, this is not science, but is that they are doing better with, and some of the theory is because the virus is trying to live and therefore it's not killing its host. So it kind of, that's what viruses kind of do. They get a little smarter because they kill everybody off and they're gone. And so it might be taming back. So, but for whatever the reason, those are all theories. We don't have to worry about any of that. You look at how many of the hospitalizations, what is the mortality, right? And those are real things. They're not predictive. And so all this other stuff that we're doing is just, it's really odd. You wouldn't think with something this important we would be doing so many foolish things with regard to what these great experts stand up in front of the camera and tell us. And you're like, is anybody thinking here? Does anybody want to take the data and go with what we really should be doing? And I think it's that they don't. It's a combination. I think there are some people who just are fearful and they just want to panic and do things that don't make sense. There's some of this, and this is really unfortunate, but there's some of this that thinks it hurts Donald Trump. And so they just want to shut things down and hurt the economy and all that. But none of that should matter. We should just go with the real data and look at what's really happened. And we don't want to take people's freedoms away. And all these shutdown type decisions actually end up costing lives. Texas just did this. Well, we're not going to open up as much, and the governor started banning elective surgeries in certain counties. That ends up killing people. There are people that don't have these surgeries, and things happen. So we really need to be smarter in what we're doing, and it's a shame that we still don't seem to have sort of a consensus on doing things the smart way.
When you're dealing with something that is new, that nobody has dealt with before, there are no experts.
Yeah.
They're just not.
That's a good line.
But everybody wants to run in front of a camera, like Kelly said, and then what I've been shocked by is how many people will flock to them and just do whatever they say. Like we're going to be governed by the experts, this oligarchy of these all-knowing people in government. They don't know what they're talking about because they've never dealt with it before. There is no expert on this. So what you have to do is just like what we said. You have to deal with the facts and deal with the data that you have. Make the best decisions that you can. And like we said a little bit before, that should be done from the ground up, not from the top down. You cannot fashion one solution to this in D.C., no offense to Dr. Fauci or Dr. Birx or whoever else they stick in front of the camera, that's going to work for 300 million people who live in all sorts of different scenarios. And then there's the political aspect of it too. That is unfortunate that some people will never miss an opportunity to make something political. This, public health, there's certainly a compelling governmental interest to protect, public health and safety. But what really, from day one, what set the sort of libertarian-leaning hairs on the back of my neck standing up was when every person in government got up and said some version of, it is the primary responsibility of the government to protect the health and safety of the public. And I'm at home, self-quarantined because of government orders and my own health crisis, basically yelling at the TV saying your first priority is to protect the rights of the people. It's not the first priority of government to protect the health and safety. Is it a priority? Yes. Is it the first priority? No. The founders were crystal clear. The sole reason for the existence of government is the protection of the rights of the people. So if you can just start talking about protecting health and safety and we can toss aside your First Amendment rights, then we are long, long gone. And that's why it's been as important as it has been, the cases that we've taken and the cases that we've won, to remind people of that, and especially those in power.
And again, your point is well taken because in some respects we don't have good data, but I think there is some bias. You just mentioned in passing that this is a political year, and you wouldn't think that a British medical journal would be that biased, but it was Lancet the other day, which is the premier British medical journal in the UK, which retracted a story that questioned the value of hydroxychloroquine. You might remember that. Now, that one, because it was mentioned by Donald Trump, is one that they went out of their way with really bad peer review to then trash. And this is the same Lancet that just a few weeks before had, and this is in a British medical journal, called for people not to vote for Donald Trump, as if anybody in Britain could vote for Donald Trump anyway. Now, there may not be bias, but when you see a correlation, you don't think it's accidental. And it's a good example. And the other day, Kelly and I and Penna, we were talking about there were two very good articles that appeared in the New England Journal of Medicine. I grew up in a medical family. My grandfather was a doctor. My father was in pharmaceuticals. We had the New England Journal Medicine journal. That's the kind of house I grew up in, on the trays there. And to think of such a prestigious journal that's now had to actually retract two of those cases, that's right up there with having a track record that sort of looks like the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and this is not looking good for science right now.
And speaking of a couple of government officials that we saw a lot of during the lockdown that there's news on, let me read you this headline that just came out. A federal judge in New York has just ruled that Mayor Bill de Blasio and Governor Andrew Cuomo have violated the Constitution by discriminating against religious groups, striking down COVID-19 lockdown orders that prevented outdoor and indoor religious activities. So
there you go.
It's not only bad for what they're doing for the coronavirus, but they're engaging in these, really nonsensical violations of religious freedom where they treat churches and synagogues and people of faith in a way that is actually, like they have less rights under the Constitution when it's actually the very opposite of that. I mean, the church and the meeting for worship in a safe way is something that all over the country can be done. Obviously, you have to look at every situation, see where you are, see what the numbers are, see if you're in New York City or in a rural church with 50 people that you can spread out all over the place. But the way this has been happening with discriminating against churches by saying, everything else, you can go to the liquor store and you can go to the marijuana dispensary and you can have an abortion But you can't go through the drive-through window at the church that's trying to provide, food for people who are in need. I mean, the stuff that's been going on is just mind-boggling.
Yes.
And here we have it right as we're on the air today, a decision by a federal judge in New York that says that de Blasio and Cuomo violated the Constitution.
You heard it right here. Another value for listening to Point of View. But let me also feature our good friends here at First Liberty. If you click on their picture, and it will take you down to their website, I give to and support First Liberty, and I encourage you to do so as well, because just like we are encouraging you to support Point of View before the end of our fiscal year, which is June 30th, next Tuesday, I would encourage you to support them as well. And look at all those victories. You go type in COVID-19. They've won them all. Okay, let's talk about a few victories you got to win. Gail Blair and a nativity scene right after this.
The extensive looting and rioting, piggybacking on the peaceful protests in response to the death of George Floyd, are disastrously counterproductive. Criminals and extremists are piling up damages that will result in costs to minority communities they claim to represent, for years to come. Wall Street Journal columnist Jason Riley provides some history to show that peaceful civil rights demonstrations get better results. He points out two consequential laws affecting African Americans, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, came as a result of Martin Luther King-style peaceful protesting. By contrast, he writes, recent history has not been especially kind to militant efforts to advance racial equality. Princeton scholar Omar Wasow has conducted a 15-year research project on the consequences of political protests. From his study of black-led demonstrations between 1960 and 1972, he concluded that nonviolent black-led protests played a critical role in tilting the national political agenda toward civil rights. But, he says, black-led resistance that included protester-initiated violence contributed to outcomes directly in opposition to the policy preferences of the protesters. Violent protests followed the April 1968 assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. In his study, Mr. Wasow, who is black himself, found that voters in counties closer to violent protests supported Richard Nixon over incumbent Hubert Humphrey by 6 to 8 percentage points. There's a lesson here for the 2020 election. Jason Riley warns politicians against allowing violent protesters to become the face of their party, and against indulging radical demands made by these protesters. He again takes us back to the Nixon presidency when advisor Daniel Patrick Moynihan pointed to a silent black majority whose concerns did not dovetail with the Black Power movement of the day. There are minority-owned businesses destroyed in the current riots. Violence undermines reform and can turn elections. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and let me just also give you a preview of next hour, because we're going to also get into, we found some notes that some people made in this whole issue of the Obamagate investigation. Might talk about that. Ted Cruz and some conservatives have headed over to another social media site, and before it's all through, got to get my history major over here to help me out here, because the other day a New York Times columnist said Abraham Lincoln did not free the slaves. The Republican Party did not help the slaves. I'm going, I don't think that's right. And as a matter of fact, some other people have disagreed with it as well. And we just had a very interesting election in which 1 out of every 5 ballots were rejected as fraud because they were mail-in ballots. Oh, never would have guessed that one. So we got a lot more to cover.
What could possibly go wrong?
So we've got lots to cover in the next hour. But Kelly, I want to go to you first. Last week, we did talk about Gail Blair. This is a blind woman in a public park. This is another one of these stories where you shake your head and say, it just couldn't be possibly true, but unfortunately it is.
Yeah, we have an elderly blind woman. I mean, really, Gail was one of the. She had a disease which she slowly was losing her sight. So as she's going through this process, God really changed her, and she was ministering, through being nursing and helping people in that way. But she just came to realize in that process that the most important thing in life was for people to know about Jesus. And so as she got blind, she couldn't do the nursing type things that she was doing before. She thought, what can I do? And so there's a park right across the street. And so she goes to the park, she sits on a bench, and obviously she can't see people. So if somebody comes near, or she's, somebody's sitting down or whatever, she simply says, would you like a Gospel of John? And she has a copy of the book of John. And so for that, she has now, this is a public park. She has been banned from the public park and from the public library. And the police have come to her home and told her that if she goes to the park or the library, she will be arrested for trespass. I mean, you can't even believe that this is true. It is true. I know we've got on our website a link. Is it on Point of View?
It's the very last article. Yes.
Okay, very last article. You can click on that. You can see her.
Picture. Yeah.
You can not only see a picture of her, but you can watch an interview with her. She was on Ray Comfort, who does a wonderful job. If anybody's seen Ray Comfort video, he had her on, let her tell her story, and so you could see her. So I would encourage people, this is the type of thing where it's a thing to share with other people so they know this type of thing is going on, because I think, number one, people need to pray for Gail Blair. But number two, this reminds people of the freedoms they have and to not be intimidated out of exercising your freedoms to let people know about Jesus. And the more people that know their freedoms, the more emboldened they will be, and the more people will be living out their faith in a way that we need in this country. So it's a great example of something. I can't imagine any of your friends who will be offended by you sending them this, because everybody pretty much is going to agree with this, that she has every right to go. Again, people say, well, she was accosting people. Well, she can't see people. How could she accost them? She's sitting there waiting to hear someone and offering them a Gospel of John. And again, it's not like she even gives them something, which she could do, by the way. I mean, you could have people that run up to you, because you see it all the time, right? And they give you literature. She's not even doing that. She's saying, would you like, and she tells them what it is, a copy of the Gospel of John. Yeah. So it really is an outrageous case, and one that we've got to win. We filed in the Rhode Island Civil Rights Commission, and that's step one. And whatever happens, we will follow this through until we get a victory at the end.
The second to last article there is Delaware town that has banned a nativity scene. We were just talking about Rhode Island. Didn't we have a case out of Pawtucket, Rhode Island, went to the Supreme Court? But here we go again. This town in Delaware has banned a nativity scene. And I guess what, Knights of Columbus brought that suit for you?
Yeah, it's Knights of Columbus. I think a lot of people know what a really incredible group that is, as far as many of the things they do to serve their communities. It's probably one of the most, if not the most, well-respected Catholic group that you find. And they have put up a nativity scene for, gosh, I don't know, what is it, Lathan? Is it 70 or 80 years or something? I mean,
yeah, it's something like that.
It's a long time. Yeah. Every Christmas season, they put that up. Well, in less than 2 years ago, the city decided, well, we're not going to allow any more religious displays during Christmas. Well, you can't do that. That's religious discrimination. And what's great now is, Kerby, is we not only have the normal argument, but we now have the victory we just won last year at the Supreme Court in the American Legion case on behalf of the Bladensburg Cross, where the court said, look, these attacks on religious displays in public are not what the Constitution supports. In fact, if something is a part of our history and traditions, and it's been up for hundreds of years, it's presumptively constitutional, even if it's religious. Here we go. So we're about to test that, and it'll be a really important case, I think, out of Delaware.
So again, both those cases are there, and if people would say, I've got a similar case in my community, I know you probably have more cases and you have people to cover them, but still you're willing to get some phone calls, because we oftentimes find that, especially if the schools start again, that all of a sudden kids can't bring candy canes, they can't give a prayer, they can't write about Jesus, those kinds of things. They can find out some information. You have some resource books there too, don't you?
Right. We've got resources, or if they just need help, to call us. And, if you've got a situation that needs to be resolved and that's a violation, Lathan might even jump on a plane and come out there and talk to your community and get them all behind the effort, because that's one of the things he does. So there are a lot of these things going on around the country, and it's just necessary that we stand up when these things happen, or you don't stop them. And in fact, they tend to grow and get worse. So it's a great time to remember our freedoms right now. And if you're worried about what's happening in the country, as I think most people are, I think the answer we're on all these Christian stations right now that are listening across the country. Everybody knows the answer is Jesus. So let's make sure that people have freedom to live that out, to share that, and if they're trying to shut that down in your community, let us know, and we're happy to give you answers to questions.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll get into a couple of issues. One of those is a piece by John Solomon that we've posted here today, because remember FBI agent Peter Strzok? Well, we've found out a little bit more. We found some notes there that seem to indicate that the former vice president, who I guess is the presumptive presidential nominee, is the one that came up with an idea of how to entrap Michael Flynn over a Logan Act, which I will give you some history about what that is or isn't. And then we'll also maybe give you some history about Abraham Lincoln and a few other things. And I did mention something in passing, but I have noticed even yesterday one of our guests said, I've gone over to Parler. Some people say, well, I don't like what Twitter is happening. Well, then there might be some alternatives. So we'll see what that takes us. And we'll continue to take your phone calls as well. But all of that is available at our website, pointofview.net. Don't forget to support Point of View. They need your support. But also, as we mentioned yesterday, we do have a matching fund, and we have to meet it. In other words, after the time is up, then we tell them how much we have been able to raise. So this is why it's perhaps even more important this time to make sure that you click on the button that says, for such a time as this, give now. Or if you want to write in, you can certainly do that as well. Post Office Box 30, Dallas, Texas, 75221. And of course, you could also give us a call on our pledge line, 800-347-5151. But we have a dollar for dollar match right now, so your gift of $50 becomes $100, $500 becomes $1,000. If you could actually come up with a $1,000 gift, that becomes $2,000, and that is real money that is waiting for us, and we just simply need you to unlock it. So let's take a break. We are privileged to have Kelly Shackelford and Lathan Watts with us today, and we will continue our conversation with them and you right after this.
America's major media are out of control. Many of them apparently believe their role is to publish things that create hysteria and outrage with false narratives, and facts don't matter. You don't believe that. Neither do we at Point of View. Truth matters. Facts matter. And that's why Kerby Anderson and the team at Point of View matter. Together, we bring the information you need to rightly respond to what's happening. And Point of View's ability to perform that role in the second half of 2020 will be determined over the next handful of hours. June is the end of our fiscal year, and your partnership today will help us set our budget for the coming months. You and Point of View, a powerful team for such a time as this. And right now, every gift you give will be doubled up to $50,000. So double your investment when you join the team online at pointofview.net/team or by phone 800-347-5151. Don't wait. Visit or call now. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour, we got a lot to cover, and I thought just for a segment, and maybe not even the full segment, we will just talk about the fact that there is this ongoing investigation. Just the other day, I posted this particular article, 7 big hints that Attorney General Barr has dropped about John Durham's investigation of the Russian investigators. So that is something that is happening. And, of course, the pandemic has slowed it down a little bit, but it does look like some of the investigation in what's called Obamagate may indeed surface before the election and maybe even continuing after the election, and it also illustrates why this November election is important. The article I've posted here today by John Solomon has to do with these FBI notes taken by the FBI agent Peter Strzok, which raises a lot of questions, not the least of which is you have President Obama, Vice President Biden in a meeting with a variety of other individuals, and I can give you that list if you need them, but we've talked about that before, and it shows that they deliberately wanted to go after the then incoming National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, and did so and used it according to ideas put forward by Joe Biden to use the Logan Act, which is kind of fallacious. We'll explain why that is in just a minute. But there have been a number of things this week. First of all, the D.C. Circuit Court really didn't just say, we would suggest that you actually set aside this conviction against Michael Flynn. We order you to do so. So that's a good step in the right direction, don't you think?
Yeah, it is. Look, this sort of what people refer to as this Trump derangement syndrome. It's just amazing how it affects some people. You have if people don't understand this, the way things work is if the government is going to charge you with a crime, that decision is made by the prosecutors. Locally, it's probably a DA office. Federally, it's the Department of Justice. It's not the judge. Okay, the judge doesn't decide the prosecutor. In fact, if the judge is deciding that, he should be disqualified for being a judge. Okay, that's a serious problem. So what you had here is, and again, it's not. There's no question at this point on what the facts are. You've got a guy who is a military hero who was serving our country, who everybody. He was in the Obama administration, he was in the Trump administration, and they clearly set him up, and he really had nothing to confess to, but they said that they were going to go after his son, and his son, I think, was about to have a baby and a family, and so he took one. He said, "I'll plead to whatever just to protect my son." Well, Barr comes in and says, this thing, the evidence is coming out, and it doesn't look so good. It looks like some people abuse their authority in the DOJ. So he asked an independent person to investigate, a career prosecutor person. He does, and he finds this, massive abuse by the FBI and the DOJ. And so he exposes that, or he gives that to, to the team and says, we've got to withdraw these charges because these are invalid. Mm-hmm. And this is a corrupt investigation. So he does, and instead of the judge saying, oh, thank goodness, we're following, the interests of justice, the judge decides that he's now the prosecutor, and he's going to decide what happened. So the idea that the Court of Appeals had to come in and say, what are you doing? thank goodness that the rule of law still got instituted. It wasn't by the judge, unfortunately. It was by the Court of Appeals. But I still do think we have a system of law and the rule of law, and it's in place. And I think, again, if people weren't in this Trump derangement thing, everybody should be grateful that when corrupt prosecutors are caught, that the charges are dropped, because that could be you next.
That's right.
And so this is a good thing. And the fact that some people complain about it just shows how messed up some people are in their thinking about how things work.
Again, that judge is Emmett Sullivan, and I did love the other day what Alan Dershowitz says. You know, he sounds more like Kelly Shackelford and Lathan Watts every day, because he said these judges now not happy with being umpires. They want to be the commissioner of baseball. They have invented exceptions to give themselves jurisdiction over cases of which there's no longer any controversy. And there's no controversy, Lathan, because the defense says we will withdraw from the case. The prosecution said there's no case. So that should be it, right? Or am I missing something?
It is hard to overstate how weird what this judge did is. You have the government who, theoretically, I mean, even the way the case is styled, it would like the United States of America versus Michael Flynn, right? The DOJ is representing we the people. The people are withdrawing their case. We're dropping the charges. And the judge says, okay, yeah, I hear that, but I'm going to postpone this for a little while because I want to get some amicus briefs in a criminal case. This isn't an appeal. Who is representing who? Who are the lawyers going to file amicus briefs on behalf of?
Right.
The entire nation, represented by the DOJ, have said we're withdrawing the charges. This is a corrupt investigation. And the judge is like, well, yeah, but I think I need to hear from a couple other people first. Like, what? And then now you have to go up to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals and with a mandamus, which is
very rare, isn't it?
Well, and it is a legal slap in the face. It is like, thou shalt do this.
Yes.
And he still is
and he still has
around.
It, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's Friday. We're still waiting, aren't we? Yeah. Unless somebody's got something on their iPhone here that I didn't see.
Lathan's analogy, let's follow through on it. It's like in baseball, because most people understand baseball, right?
Yeah.
It's like the coach decides, I'm taking out the catcher. He's about to come up to bat, and I'm going to replace him with another catcher who's going to bat for him. And it's like the umpire saying, no, wait, we're holding up the game. I'm not sure yet that I agree with your decision. I might want to put somebody else in on your team. At that point, the umpire needs to leave the field. Okay? He's just disclosed something that he probably shouldn't have disclosed.
Take off the stripes.
That's
you
right.
should no longer be an umpire. Again, weren't these judges supposed to be umpires, and instead they want to be the commissioner of baseball?
Yeah, and I mean, it highlights a lot of things. One, the importance of putting people with a modicum of humility on the court. I mean, on in all courts.
Yep.
It demonstrates the necessity that our justice system not be politicized, and another example of the criminalization of politics.
It's really dangerous.
A political beef with this guy, and you set out to destroy his life with a criminal investigation, and like Kelly said, threaten to go after his family. It's wrong on so many levels, and the fact that it is finally being corrected should be something that everybody can get on board with. You want to talk about criminal justice reform? You want to talk about issues that people in Congress are making a lot of noise about right now? Well, here's some criminal justice reform for you. How about we not have judges who want to be prosecutors and judges at the same time? How about we stick to the rule of law, and that the law is applied equally to people, and not just how this judge interprets it at this moment on this day? Because once you're doing that, you are ruled by men. You're not ruled by law. That the law should mean the same thing for everybody. The Constitution should mean the same thing for everybody. That's why you don't want judges interpreting the Constitution in this it's evolved to mean this. If it meant something yesterday and it means something different today, it's meaningless tomorrow.
Very good. Let's take a break. And when we come back, we might talk about criminal justice for another minute or two, and that is Senator Scott was trying to pass a piece of legislation, but Democrats didn't agree. So we'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
We're a divided country, but it may be worse than we imagined. An article in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences discussed what is called motive attribution asymmetry. That's a technical term for the assumption that your ideology is based in love and your opponent's is based on hate. Put another way, we're the good guys, they're the bad guys. They discovered that the average Republican and the average Democrat today are as divided as the Palestinians and Israelis. In his op-ed in the New York Times, Arthur Brooks says we see the other side as an enemy with whom one cannot negotiate or compromise. He comes to this startling conclusion. People often say that our problem in America is incivility or intolerance. He says that's incorrect. Motive attribution asymmetry leads to something far worse, contempt, which is a noxious brew of anger and disgust. And it is made worse by what he calls the outrage industrial complex that oftentimes caters to one side and criticizes the other. Now, when people hear about political conflicts, they often prescribe the wrong solutions. Just because we disagree doesn't mean we should put aside our disagreements. Arthur Brooks instead says that we need not disagree less. Instead, we need to disagree better. Whether we're discussing politics, economics, or philosophy, we should engage in a robust competition of ideas. We can disagree without being so disagreeable. So he suggests 2 steps. First, turn away from what he calls the rhetorical dope peddlers. These are powerful people on your side who are profiting from the culture of contempt. Second, make a commitment never to treat others with contempt. Christians should be civil and gracious. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We don't spend a lot of time talking about Obamagate because, first of all, there are a lot of others that are doing that. We post an article from time to time that I think will be helpful, but it is important. And as Lathan said just a minute ago, you might say, I don't know Michael Flynn, I don't really know anything about him, really don't care. Yes, but if they can do it to an incoming national security advisor, they can do it to you. And it does seem to me that these notes that now have surfaced, I mean, every day there's just something else. I'm always waiting for the next shoe to drop. Well, we've had a whole factory of shoes dropping lately because we just find out more and more every day. What we found out is the vice president in that meeting suggested the Logan Act. You might say, what is that? Well, back in 1799, of all things, it said you're not supposed to, as a private citizen, have any negotiations with anybody in a foreign government. It's never really been used because it didn't need to be used. And to say that somehow Michael Flynn, who's the incoming national security advisor, can't talk with the Ambassador Kislyak is kind of absurd at its face, but it shows that when you have Barack Obama and Joe Biden saying, oh, no, we didn't do anything wrong, there's some things out of that meeting that we're now learning, right?
Every day, just like you said, you have to look very closely to find it because the news media is willfully obstinate in not covering it. And so it is, when you find good information about it, thank you for posting it.
If it were reversed, I think we'd be hearing about it. If this was the Bush administration doing this to the Obama administration, what do you think?
Yeah, and I think that, I do this on a personal level when I'm reading stories about this investigation or that investigation or whoever. I will sort of remind myself, like, take the political labels off of it. Forget if it's Republican or Democrat, and look at what happened. And would I be upset about this regardless of the label, right? To make sure that I'm not looking at something through a political lens. Just like you said, if George W. Bush and Vice President Cheney were in a meeting with their FBI director and several others and the incoming national security advisor for the Obama administration that they knew had some conversation with Russian diplomats, and and Vice President Cheney said, you know what, maybe we can get this guy on the Logan Act. And President Bush turns to the FBI director and says, make sure the right people are assigned to this.
Which is exactly what happened, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
Like, what do you think the media's coverage of that? It would be wall to wall, because it is this is just my opinion. It's far worse than what Nixon was run out of office for. I mean, yes, what happened in the Watergate Hotel was a crime, and the cover-up became even worse than the initial crime. And what was the buzzword, all through that? What did Nixon know, and when did he know it? Obama and Biden knew about this from day one.
Mm-hmm.
And if Strzok's notes are to be believed, were directing it in the Oval Office. It's mind-boggling to me the lack of coverage of this investigation, when it's more and more facts come out as to what they knew and when they knew it. No, like the FISA warrant applications to spy on members of the Trump campaign team based on the Steele dossier that they knew was false, which means they lied to a federal judge when they went for FISA warrants. I mean, that's a federal crime in and of itself right there. And the fact that, nobody to date is really going to jail for any of this. If any one of us around the table and engaged in any behavior like this in the private sector, we wouldn't have a prayer of staying out of jail. And it's, as we were talking about in the last segment, if it could happen to Michael Flynn, what could a justice system that's this politicized or this corrupt do to the average citizen? I mean, it did practically bankrupt Michael Flynn. I mean, and part of the reason, First Liberty, the cases that we take, that we don't charge our clients anything, because most people could not afford a litigation team to go on this long to handle something this important. So it's shocking to me. I shouldn't be shocked, I guess, but it still is, to me, that it's not covered as much as it probably should be. But we'll see. It's just like you said, every day another shoe seems to drop.
Yeah, one of the things that I know, it's kind of odd, but these abuses of power by the FBI and the DOJ really kind of gave me more of a light. I tended to be a little naive in thinking prosecutors and people usually are trying to do their duty. Mm-hmm. That they're not there to sort of politicize their office. They're there to enforce the law, and when people engage in criminal violations, they go after them. Now, there are those in the African American community that say, well, that's not always the way it goes. And I would kind of always, lean towards the benefit of the doubt to the prosecutor. And and I still do. Most people are not corrupt like this, but to see this at this level, FBI, DOJ, involved in really a conspiracy, not caring if they destroy people's lives, just using the criminal system, has given me really has given me a new perspective, or a different perspective, to be much more open to these kind of abuses, against minorities, because clearly people do abuse these. And it might not be as small as I thought it was. I mean, it's not a majority of the people or anything like that. But this is scary. And then you add to that where did this come from? It came from President Obama and Vice President Joe Biden. I mean, again, if we weren't in this weird situation with the media not being the media right now, they're kind of all partisan, this would be the story. I mean, this is like historically one of the largest acts of treason, and it's by another president and a vice president.
Yes.
It's shocking on so many levels, and yet there's very little discussion of it right now because it doesn't fit the partisan, interest of those who are wanting to talk about the news.
Yeah, I worked in a prosecutor's office as an intern my last semester of law school, and saw the reality of criminal jurisprudence up front, very up close and personal. And I would agree with Kelly. The overwhelming majority of people in prosecutors' offices are there for a reason. I mean, they're there because they're sort of wide-eyed idealists, just like I was, that believe in truth, justice, and the American way. Right?
Because they don't get paid very much.
No,
it's a
they don't.
huge cut in pay, but they're there to enforce the law.
That's exactly right. And I think what this whole scandal highlights for me is that in most cases, I agree with you. Out there, in America, so to speak, that is probably the general rule. But inside Washington, D.C., there's a whole other system. And you have one justice system inside Washington, D.C., and you have the justice system for the rest of the country.
And I tell you, one of the things that to me is really disappointing is the current FBI director. He should have been cleaning house. So if that has not been happening, so the immediate thing you think is he's corrupt too. Because, you look at what's been happening. I mean, I don't care who you are. If you come in and you're in charge and this is what you find, I mean, you'd be clearing the place out with all these corrupt people.
Exactly.
And so what a disappointment. And I don't understand why the president knew there was a problem here when he appointed Wray. Why didn't he know what he was getting? I don't understand. That's one of the things that's been baffling. Now, Barr has been proper as an attorney general in trying to get to the bottom of these things because, people don't like Barr for politics, whatever, because he's Trump's AG. Barr is a law and order type guy, and he loves the Department of Justice. He had worked there before. He has a lot of respect for it. His goal is to clean it up. And if you watch, you can see that's what he's trying to do. He's not, that's just, he was there before. This is his second time as an attorney general. And he doesn't want to see the Department of Justice, besmirched forever.
Right.
And so, but what is Wray doing? Nothing. And I've got to think that eventually he's going to be gone because we need somebody that. I think of all these FBI agents. They're such wonderful people who are out there working hard. They're great Americans, and they're all being smeared by what these people in Washington D.C. But if the director would just clean the house, they could get their reputation back. And it's not happening. I think that's sad.
Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we did talk about criminal justice, and there was an attempt by Senator Tim Scott to push through what was called the Justice Act, which dealt with all sorts of things from restraints to no-knock warrants. Didn't deal much with qualified immunity, but dealt with a number of good things, but couldn't even get enough people to even want to debate it. So then the House has been talking about this, and the other day, the House Judiciary Committee chairman, Jared Nadler, said, the trouble with Republicans are dealing with imaginary things like Antifa. Imaginary things. Oh, so we've got a few more things to talk about. And what about tearing down all these monuments and statues? We'll talk about that right after this.
America's major media are out of control. Many of them apparently believe their role is to publish things that create hysteria and outrage with false narratives, and facts don't matter. You don't believe that. Neither do we at Point of View. Truth matters. Facts matter. And that's why Kerby Anderson and the team at Point of View matter. Together, we bring the information you need to rightly respond to what's happening. And Point of View's ability to perform that role in the second half of 2020 will be determined over the next handful of hours. June is the end of our fiscal year, and your partnership today will help us set our budget for the coming months. You and Point of View, a powerful team for such a time as this. And right now, every gift you give will be doubled up to $50,000. So double your investment when you join the team online at pointofview.net/team or by phone 800-347-5151. Don't wait. Visit or call now. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Kelly Shackelford, Lathan Watts with us. And I thought for just a minute, we won't take a lot of time, talk about criminal justice. We have a booklet on that subject, but it was an attempt by the senator from South Carolina, Senator Tim Scott, has been on the program with us before, to put together the Justice Act to address some of the issues that have surfaced as a result of the death of George Floyd. I think he did a very good job of trying to do that. But as the Wall Street Journal pointed out, the Democrats, first of all, are convinced they're going to win the Senate in November, so they don't have a real desire to pass anything that could give credit to Republicans, including Tim Scott. And number two, they also know, and this is another sad commentary, that they will face absolutely no criticism for obstruction of a piece of legislation. And so the vote was the other day to consider the legislation, and you need 60 votes to even consider it, and you couldn't get more than 55. And so the reality is we don't want to, because there were comments made about that this is inadequate, it doesn't cover everything. I think all of us would agree there probably might be some amendments that could be added to it, all sorts of things. But when you don't even want to bring it to a vote, that tells me a lot. And that's pretty cynical right now in terms of trying to even get anything through Congress.
It is. It's sad because clearly what you have in the positions people are taking, the Republicans led by Tim Scott, who's, again, I think people know this, but Tim Scott is a black U.S. Senator from South Carolina, and he clearly cares about this issue, and he's come up with things that everybody could agree on that would be improvements. And in fact, he had one that they didn't think they would even be able to get the president to agree to, the National Registry, with if police engage in misconduct, et cetera, then there's this registry. And so now the Democrats say they want to go further than this. Well, okay, pass this and then fight over what you want to go further. So when they won't pass something that they agree with, they just don't think goes far enough. They think there could be more. Now it's clear what's going on, right? They don't want anything good to be passed because of politics. Now that is really sad. I mean, if I am a leader in trying to improve police misconduct and this type of thing, if I'm then at that point, what should happen if you're not in it for the politics, if you're in it for the issues, is you should read those Democrats a riot act. How dare you not take the fact that we can get something done right now and then fight for the extra? But this just shows we don't give the Republicans anything, because the Republicans then they would rather posture and have nothing be done to resolve the issue because they can use that politically. That's very sad. There should be consequences when people do that from either side. But as you say, I don't know that there will be.
Yeah, I agree. And there's way too much posturing, as you said, over substance. You could have a debate as to whether or not this is the federal government's responsibility at all. Policing is a local matter.
Yeah.
Reforms, again, should come
local and state,
at the local and state level.
And it's mostly carrot and stick. We provide a little bit of money, and it's only 6% of the New York City's police budget, so it's not a lot, but it's a way to get everybody's attention.
Right. You can incentivize with federal funds. Like we make federal grants available to police departments for X, for Y, for Z, but you're only going to get those now if you have this policy in place. That's typically how the feds are involved. So, that's a legitimate policy debate as to which level of government really should be responsible for this. But to just say, like as Kelly mentioned, that, well, this doesn't go far enough, so we're going to kill this bill. Well, if it doesn't go far enough, it sounds as if it's going in the direction you want it to go. So if it's in the direction you want it to go, then why not? And then, as Kelly said, then build on it if you want to. If you want to come back with something else, that's how the the process works. But it has been completely style over substance. That's how you get a bunch of House members taking a knee for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, and then many of them having to be helped up afterwards. Okay, so you took it. And now what? Yeah. What did that accomplish other than, Nancy Pelosi, you've been in Congress for 38 years, and all of a sudden you've discovered statutes you don't like. Here's a chance to do something of substance, and your party is blocking it because you don't want the other party to get any credit for doing anything. Then don't talk to me about we need to come together in a bipartisan way to address this. I'm done listening. You had a chance and you didn't do it.
And the debate took place in the House yesterday, and that did not go well either because, as I mentioned before, Gerald Nadler, who is the House Judiciary Committee chairman, this is in committee right now, their particular bill, which is really more of a show bill, but I'll leave it as it is there, in which he simply said, the problem is these Republicans are dealing with imaginary things like Antifa. And that set off Jim Jordan, as you might imagine, who said, I can't believe the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee would utter such a statement on the House floor. It's where they're not imaginary, they're real. If you don't believe that, go talk to Andy Ngo, the journalist in Portland who was attacked by Antifa, who the President of the United States designated as a terrorist organization. And to have the chair of the House Judiciary Committee on the floor say these words, imaginary things like Antifa, they are far from imaginary. So that did not go well there either. And it's just a good illustration of how we can't seem to get any piece of legislation passed through House and Senate right now.
Yeah, it's a real problem, and I don't know the solution to it. And what's happened, really the last number of presidents now is they just kind of pass executive orders, which is not legislation. It's just sort of telling the executive branch what it can do, and then nothing else gets passed. Now, I will say this: the things that were passed, pretty significant, right? I mean, not a lot of things passed, but we passed a tax, tax reductions and improving our tax relief, which for lower income people was very significant. And the First Step Act, which is criminal justice reform.
Yeah,
that was bipartisan.
One of the few things we can point to after 4 years.
And this is right in that line. Yes. I mean, this is something everybody agrees. No chokeholds unless it's to save the life right then of the officer. A database that includes the police officers who have engaged in misconduct, so that people know when they go from one community to another, et cetera. I mean,
knock warrants.
Yeah, knock warrants. I mean, a lot
big stuff.
Yeah, these are real improvements. And the idea that they won't, I mean, it's just really sad. It's really cynical and really sad that they won't. It reminds me of when the Democrats they talked about immigration being an important issue, and they had the House and the Senate and the presidency, and they did nothing because they'd rather do nothing at that point and use it as a political issue that they thought was effective against the Republicans. So it's they should do their job, and I think people should be thrown out on both parties if they're not doing their job.
There was a question on Facebook, and maybe both of you can speak to that, because the question was, what happens to Judge Emmett Sullivan, who overstepped his bounds, who decided that he wasn't just going to be the umpire, but he was going to be the commissioner of baseball, who decided that once the case was over, it wasn't over for him. Are there any repercussions that ever come to a federal judge?
Not really. There is the ability of the Court of Appeals to actually take action against him for misconduct, but that's very rare. I know of a judge that happened to here locally, not too far from where I am, where the Federal Court of Appeals, the Fifth Circuit, had to do that, but he was a very abusive judge, and so it's not likely, unfortunately. And this is the thing, the independence we're trying to give these federal judges means they're appointed for life, and they're really not accountable to anybody. And you can remove them if they're not engaging in, quote, good behavior. But the way that's what the Constitution says. But the way that has generally been interpreted is if they're caught like in a crime, like
more
bribery, it has to be really serious.
Sure,
and so really no. But I mean, the idea of your colleagues at the Federal Court of Appeals issuing a mandamus. This is very embarrassing.
That's at least a slap in the hand or more than that.
It's really one of those things that'll be on your record for the rest of your life as sort of a little bit of an embarrassment that you would do something so out of line.
Well, after we come back from the break, let's talk about this, because I think they just had 200 judges, right? And that's kind of a significant number.
Absolutely.
And
it's
that's
big.
the solution. So I want to talk about that. And a lot of my callers have said, okay, they're tearing down these monuments. Can we do anything? And I mentioned just the other day the Veterans Memorial Preservation Act, in which you could get a 10-year sentence. And we saw last night President Trump talking about that. So you're not going to hear some of the things we'll talk about after the break, because no other press seemed to be interested in it. Not even some of the conservative press, but certainly all the mainstream liberal press. So if that doesn't justify why you should support both First Liberty and, of course, what we do here at Point of View, I don't know what else does. But we'll come back. We have a couple more issues, and we have been tearing down statues. Thomas Jefferson, Cervantes, Gandhi, Voltaire, Stevie Ray Vaughan. Oh, this is crazy. We'll be back right after this.
The extensive looting and rioting, piggybacking on the peaceful protests in response to the death of George Floyd, are disastrously counterproductive. Criminals and extremists are piling up damages that will result in costs to minority communities they claim to represent, for years to come. Wall Street Journal columnist Jason Riley provides some history to show that peaceful civil rights demonstrations get better results. He points out two consequential laws affecting African Americans, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, came as a result of Martin Luther King-style peaceful protesting. By contrast, he writes, recent history has not been especially kind to militant efforts to advance racial equality. Princeton scholar Omar Wasow has conducted a 15-year research project on the consequences of political protests. From his study of black-led demonstrations between 1960 and 1972, he concluded that nonviolent black-led protests played a critical role in tilting the national political agenda toward civil rights. But, he says, black-led resistance that included protester-initiated violence contributed to outcomes directly in opposition to the policy preferences of the protesters. Violent protests followed the April 1968 assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. In his study, Mr. Wasow, who is black himself, found that voters in counties closer to violent protests supported Richard Nixon over incumbent Hubert Humphrey by 6 to 8 percentage points. There's a lesson here for the 2020 election. Jason Riley warns politicians against allowing violent protesters to become the face of their party, and against indulging radical demands made by these protesters. He again takes us back to the Nixon presidency, when advisor Daniel Patrick Moynihan pointed to a silent black majority whose concerns did not dovetail with the Black Power movement of the day. There are minority-owned businesses destroyed in the current riots. Violence undermines reform and can turn elections. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and of course we have seen monuments being torn down right and left, and I, just to try to add a little humor, mention that it's just not just Thomas Jefferson or Andrew Jackson or something like that. It's Ulysses S. Grant, who actually fought the Civil War. It's Abraham Lincoln. It's Churchill. What he has to do with that, I do not know. An abolitionist, Matthias Baldwin, and guitarist Stevie Ray Vaughan, I think, gets the point across. And so a lot of people say, well, are we going to do anything? And I think that's a really good question right now. Victor Davis Hanson said you got anger on both sides. You got anger on those in the streets tearing them down, and you got anger simmering in the hearts of people watching this saying, we're going to solve this come November, So, but there is a Veterans Memorial Preservation Act passed back in 2003. It has for fines and a 10-year jail sentence for anyone who willfully injures or destroys any structure, plaque, statue, or monument on public property commemorating the service of any person or persons in the armed forces of the United States. I was wondering if the president would use it, and he's been talking about that, and maybe that's a solution right now, and maybe we're going to see some people that actually will go to jail. Apparently, some of them are in jail right now, and that was probably surprising to people. And if indeed that goes to the courts, maybe they go to prison, do hard time. What's the thoughts?
If they do, then you might see some of this nonsense stop.
Yeah.
Because right now there's no repercussion for it. It is, I'm part of the mob. Here's a statue. Let's tear it down. They clearly don't care who the statue is commemorating.
Pretty obvious, yeah.
Either that or they have no idea.
Yeah, they don't know about
who the
history.
statue is.
Yeah.
Because they're just tearing everything down. Like you said, I mean, Ulysses S. Grant, Abraham Lincoln. There was a call for the destruction of any sort of stained glass or mural depicting the European Jesus and his European mother. There's
so-called white Jesus, yeah,
right. The white Jesus and his mother as somehow
it's white supremacy,
right?
Yeah.
It is similar. If you study history, there's a similar dynamic. What you see in this movement, and I hate to use the word movement because it really is Marxists that are trying to co-opt people who are legitimately outraged, as they should be, about some injustice in this country. But that's always what Marxists do. But when you see this, let's just tear everything down, it's because they want to tear every institution down so that they can replace it with what they want. And so this, I mean, it is an attempt at a Marxist revolution. And if you study like the French Revolution, and that there's the difference between the French Revolution and the American Revolution. And what you're seeing right now is much more akin to the French Revolution. Yes. That once it starts, it just doesn't stop. And when we start cutting people's heads off for anything, that's
because they're not radical enough.
Exactly. And
ask J.K. Rowling about that right now. You can be pro-transgender, and that's just not enough.
It doesn't matter. Yeah. It just never ends. The revolution just feeds itself.
And if people don't understand, I mean, that's one of the things I never see people explain what's going on. Because they're like, wait, what? I thought this was about George Floyd, and I thought this was about what is going on with the tearing down of the statues. With it's a mark. The whole Marxist point is you are either an oppressed or you are the oppressor. You have to be put into one of the two, and then the goal is for all those who call themselves the oppressed to overthrow the government. Not to make changes in the law, they want a violent revolution. And so that's what you're seeing. They're seeing, as Lathan said, you're seeing what could be very important issues about police brutality and racism and all that being, you have these Marxists that are coming in. And you might say, well, gosh, how did they get in? Well, unfortunately, the group Black Lives Matter, they had people had admitted they're Marxist. So, of course, this is what happens, right? So that's what you're seeing. Now, we had our case at the Supreme Court a number of years ago with involving tearing down of monuments. It was a veterans memorial in the Mojave Desert. And so I've known for a long time it's a 10-year, sentence in jail if you tear down a monument. So when they were going after that veterans memorial we were protecting, I was aware of that. They need to enforce the law, just like they do against looting, against rioting. And if they do that, they'll clear the Marxists out from the real issues that need to be addressed. So this needs to be something we all get together on, and let's enforce the law and stop these people from taking advantage of what they're trying to do and an opportunity to really foment revolution.
Let's take a phone call because there was something that was vandalized I thought you might want to know about. So Michael in South Carolina, WAGP, share with our audience what took place. Michael, are you there?
I am.
Yeah, go ahead.
So last night there was a memorial in Charleston that is for the Charleston 9 firefighters that died a few years back, which we just had an anniversary of that. it was vandalized. And this is American flags, crosses, and that sort of thing. It has nothing to do with skin color. There were black, there were white that died in that fire. And this thing was vandalized. And it's just, this is going way too far. We need to stop. When things like that get vandalized, it's just not necessary. And I'm just appalled at that. I'm a firefighter, and it just bothers me that people are doing stuff like this. We've got to take back this country. We've got to put a stop to this. And I have my father fought and died in Vietnam for the right for people to have the right to protest.
Yeah, peaceful protest, but not vandalizing Charleston 9 monument. I wish I had more time because I want to hear the rest of the story, but we can talk about it next week.
And again, just what we talked about. People are watching this stuff and they're going, wait, what does this have to do? If people need to explain to one another what's going on, that this is an attempt at a Marxist revolution. That's why you see these violations of the law, the violence and the things, and we've got to enforce the law to separate these people out and have peaceful protesters and people who are actually trying to accomplish something other than overthrow our government. But that's why it doesn't make sense if you're watching this happen. You go, wait, this is nuts.
This had nothing to do with
They're
it.
trying to tear down the statue of Lincoln freeing the slaves. You know, I mean, like, are you just really dumb?
Yes.
Or is it, and there is that too, but there's also a purpose. It's the revolution. That's they want to overthrow everything, all history.
Sure. Well, I wish we had more time. We always have more content and time. Matter of fact, we never really got into the whole history of that statue, but we'll do that another time. But let me first of all mention that we have Kelly Shackelford and Lathan Watts with us, and if you follow that link, I would encourage you to give to First Liberty. And you certainly have had a lot more that you ever thought you were going to have. You didn't know you were going to be evaluating judges. You didn't know that you were going to be having to address all these issues during the pandemic. So it's amazing that you're still standing and able to pay all your bills every day. But you could certainly use some financial support.
This is it's our fiscal year end in just 4 or 5 days. I guess 4 days. So that would be great. And we just hit number 200 in judges confirmed for life. So getting really good, solid believers who are smart and just are going to be the right kind of judges, I think that's going to have a long-term impact on our country.
For our children and grandchildren. So again, thank you both for being here. Let me just mention as well, Point of View will be, of course, back next week, as we always will be, right up to the 4th of July, giving you broadcast. But again, yesterday we were able to hear that we have a matching fund, so that means your gift of any amount will be doubled. So if you can give $100, it becomes $200. If you can give $1,000, it becomes $2,000. So please take advantage of that, because it is one where once we have the amount in, we will let them know. And it is actually only released by your gift. So anything you can do would be greatly appreciated. You can give us a call, 800-347-5151. Simplest one is to go to pointofview.net. Of course, if you want to write to us, Post Office Box 30, Dallas, Texas, 75221. I want to thank Ivy and Andrew for their help. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday on Point of View.
America's major media are out of control. Many of them apparently believe their role is to publish things that create hysteria and outrage with false narratives, and facts don't matter. You don't believe that. Neither do we at Point of View. Truth matters. Facts matter. And that's why Kerby Anderson and the team at Point of View matter. Together, we bring the information you need to rightly respond to what's happening. And Point of View's ability to perform that role in the second half of 2020 will be determined over the next handful of hours. June is the end of our fiscal year, and your partnership today will help us set our budget for the coming months. You and Point of View, a powerful team for such a time as this. And right now, every gift you give will be doubled up to $50,000. So double your investment when you join the team online at pointofview.net/team or by phone 800-347-5151. Don't wait. Visit or call now. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.